So we've got an amazing crew here. Without any ado, I'd love to give the crew a chance to speak to you.
Thanks so much for the great introduction, Franklin. As always, this is going to be a great show, and I love this topic choice today of the synchronicity expressing the breath of life. What a beautiful show this is going to be, and this is really resonating with me in particular. As Franklin mentioned, I have my hand in a lot of pots, and I try to break down the compartmentalization of thought and try to break through to connect the dots and weave the golden thread through the various systems of knowledge and wisdom that we've found and we've been uncovering. So synchronicity and the breath of life touch a lot of things for me. Now, I've had some out of body experiences in the year 2000. I was shown just about everything in the universe and had a glorious experience of have been brought up through the sun, moon, and stars, and being shown all the time from the beginning of time through the cycles of time and various timelines within. So I feel like there's so much going on here than the linear time that is shown to us through academia, and there's so much going on in the world, in the living world and in nature, that's really not really focused on in organized religions. And so I feel like Rupert Sheldrake has brought forth like a big movement with the ideas of panpsychism and morphic resonance that he's retrieved from ancient French philosophers. And it's really blown my mind to know that in England they're considering that nature has a mind. And this is very much in line with my practice of ancient philosophical Taoism, which I've been practicing for about 25 years. So it's really beautiful for me to see the connection between synchronicity and the breath of life, as if the mind of nature is breathing life, and it's through us that we see the connections of synchronicity, because it's all connected. And through shadow work, which I do, it was mentioned earlier, we tend to have a very different change in perspective and focus through the process of shadow work. So I think through that aspect, I've been able to see more of the integration and the connections between things, and see past the egoistic separation that's pushed on us that we're supposed to focus on. So once you can see past those delusional separations, you can start to see how things connect. Synchronicity starts to become more evident and apparent, and the magic starts to happen. So this would be a good show. We'll start to get into some of that and more, I'm sure. It's good to have Cosmic back with us today. He's been doing a couple of things for the last couple of weeks, and Franklin and I have just been running the show. But it's so great to have a third party here. There's not a crowd with this crowd.
Yeah, definitely, man. For synchronicity is something that I've been kind of one topic that I've been researching with this particular system. But what I like to always been kind of fascinating is like how synchronicities manifest depending upon what belief system you follow. I've kind of realized that they're like depending upon, what you believe in and your expectations, like that determines like certain types of synchronicity, how they're contextualized, how they're expressed. And kind of like I even figured out like, this idea that like the intensity of the belief can kind of like, increase or decrease the amount of synchronicity. There's a kind of like an actual quantifiable aspect. See, I think with my practice, I kind of look at things, I don't know if I want to say scientifically, but it's but I kind of just try to figure things out piece by piece and sort of put them together. And synchronicity is part of the puzzle there. So yeah, this will be an interesting topic to talk about today.
Heck yeah. I like the idea of the puzzle. It all fits together, but it can be puzzling to the egoic mind. We only focus on the separations in the lines.
Absolutely. I was listening to you, and then my phone rang. We've got Pick and Pay food deliveries coming in. I'm
Oh my goodness.
Multitasking. Doing like 3 things at once. But yeah, I mean, that's so on point, you know. I think it's very interesting because you mentioned panpsychism, and it makes me think about the earlier cosmological perspectives. And I think like this is probably a story where we should start at the beginning, at the dawns of time, back in the day before we had the need to eat or the need for speed, right? We were talking about computer games. Oh my gosh. And, you know, the old cosmological ideologies that come from the mystery traditions, mystery religions, that all seem to speak the same kind of language, suggest that we were emanations of consciousness before we were emanations of form. So before we had these physical, dense bodies that required eating, we were light beings. The hue man, the man was a being of hues of different colors and different spectrum of light. And, you know, for whatever reasons, the hue became more entrenched, and the crystallization of this light started to become a phenomenon, you know, matter. We became deeply entrenched within the matter, and we required the drinking of water, the eating of food, and then, you know, with that came all the other desires, and the passions became highly empowered because matter started making its own set of rules. So like these old traditions maintain this concept that we were beings of spirit and beings of consciousness and beings of light before we were beings of physicality. So bringing that back into the panpsychist perspective, what that suggests, if we take panpsychism not the way it's interpreted by the modern physicists, and by the way, guys, I hope my audio is rocking and rolling. Hope everything is alles good. Namaste, Mexico. Beautiful Mexico. I hope your evening is great. So, all I can think about is chocolate. Mexico got me like a big kilogram of cocoa. I'm like, whoa. So, been doing that cocoa for a couple of days and waiting for the mother load. But
have you ever done cacao ceremony?
I'm going to be doing cacao ceremonies like every day from now on. No, I have a special place in my heart, and I did research into how many things. Like, just I've always known, so I never researched it. But we were having a conversation. I was like, okay, it's good for your liver, it's good for your kidney, it's good for your spleen, it's good for your brain, it's good for your heart, it's good for your DNA.
Yeah,
protects you from free radical damage. It's antioxidant. It cleans out all of the toxins. I mean, there's a list of things as long as your arm for why you should be having. Obviously, not chocolate that they sell. It's got to be bitter.
yeah,
And it can't be like laced with dairy, right? Because like whatever good stuff you get from it is just like ripped out by the dairy. The way they make chocolate in the shops, like it's a sweet, it's not good for you. But anyway, so there's this idea that we progressed, and this is interesting because it's on point with what I was talking about, the desires of the body, right? I'm suddenly thinking about cocoa, the taste, I love it. There's an addiction element to like this human condition of the body. If you eat a piece of cheesecake, then next time you want to eat a piece of cheesecake again. And if you get used to eating a piece of cheesecake often, you'll be like, oh, where's my cheesecake? And it's the same, whether it's chocolate, cocoa, coffee, even hummus. Hummus can be addictive. I get addicted to hummus.
yeah.
You know, to the point where it's like all we want to eat is hummus. I'm like, got to like rein my son in. Like, no, we've got to eat like other things too, because the hummus is really good in this house. You know, I make it fresh. So when you make your fresh hummus, and you can make it a little bit warm because it's freshly made, then you got this warm bowl of hummus and no shortage of extra virgin olive oil. It becomes like a delicacy. So yeah, these desires that keep us locked into the flesh and keep us cycling around the matter are sort of supposedly emanations of matter. And I think this is why we have synchronicity. Synchronicity, from my perspective, and I'd love to hear your guys' take on this, is like that inner part of ourselves reaching out to remind us, like, oi, this show isn't what you think it is. This reality is not what you think it is. Let me prove it to you. Watch this. Ding, ding. Did you see that? And it's like our higher selves are reaching in through matter to remind us, like, yeah, but time is just an illusion. It's not real. It seems real. Everything you think, yeah, seems so solid and so fixed, but watch this. Do you see the way that works? Everything works in little concentric circles, and they all keep coming back, and everything is in cycles. And so, you're not a complete lunatic to think that. So what do you guys think? How to interpret this panpsychism, and did we stem from a spiritual state of being before we descended into the field of matter? Because I think this is really important to understand how the breath of life and synchronicity tie into each other.
I think traditionally people consider that synchronicity happens because the apparent coincidences that are happening are actually being orchestrated by a higher consciousness that's something that kind of pervades us, something that connects us, something that is overseeing us all and sees the connections between us and brings those connections together. And to the point where it might seem like a coincidence, like how could this have happened on its own? And the point is that it did not, that there's overseeing element there that's drawing things together, whether that may be angels or God or goddess, God and goddess, or deities or spirits, or maybe perhaps the spirit of nature or Mother Earth. There's many different takes on what that guiding force is. The Tao kind of encapsulates all of those things, embracing it as a mystery. And the fact is that there's something that seems to be there that draws us together for those times where it seems like this seems to be too coincidental to be real. This seems like this is a sign that there's something greater out there that's guiding things and making things happen, and it's revealing itself to us now. So I think synchronicities are powerful, and I feel like deja vu is kind of along with synchronicities in the sense that it's an aspect of the subconscious mind that's kind of coming out and showing the conscious mind something from a timeless aspect of universal cosmic order. They're kind of beautiful little glimpses that we see. That's my take on it.
I have a more stripped down take on the whole idea of synchronicity. To me, I just kind of see it as dream logic playing out in physical reality. If you think about let's just say, for example, you watch the movie Jurassic Park and then you go to sleep and you have dreams about dinosaurs. I think in that same kind of sort of method, or that same kind of process, the things we just think about or things we fixate on just manifest into reality in the same way. If you're thinking about something during the day, it'll probably show up in your dreams. So I kind of look at it that way, because I think, with my study and the kind of this extra dimensional, epistemology with different belief systems, I don't think there is a single source for the synchronicity. I think it's kind of like, it's kind of like, you think about, you have like a job coach or something, and you talk to them and they hook you up with certain things. Like they have like a plan set out for you, or I'm trying to think of the right analogy where it's like you're orchestrating someone, they have a plan, they're going to set you up. So basically, you get a relationship with a God, and then that God or that belief system then dictates your synchronicities. Because I think about it, because Christians have their synchronicities, Buddhists have their synchronicities, pagans have their synchronicities, and I'm not sure it's all exactly the same cosmological force specifically, but I think you can see that, because I have synchronicities with my fae. That's one of the reasons that I got so serious with this work, is because the synchronicities were just so beyond just random chance in terms of how I experienced them. They were so specific and so immediate too. There was no wait or hesitation. It'll just you'll hear a word they'll say in your head, and then there'll be something out in external reality at that exact same second. And I've kind of and the thing is too, I've experimented with different belief systems over my life, more traditional belief systems, more chaos magic type stuff. And it's in a way, it's they all kind of work in a sense. So I think I just kind of like basically try to figure out like what is the sort of the what is the nuts and bolts of synchronicity. I don't get too sort of caught up in the narrative of it being some kind of like bigger, you know, universal thing. But it seems to me that it's obvious that our thoughts and our intentions do have some sort of impact on the state of reality and this world in general.
Yeah, I think a lot of folks fall into different schools of thought, and it's kind of a sense of a following in the sense that they're really not really generating part of that school of thought, but they're really just joining it. Whereas I think other people that generate their own schools of thought and combine different aspects of inspiration can kind of have an overarching influence on many different systems of thought. What are your thoughts on that, Cosmic? Is it possible to have a system of thought that combines those other systems?
Yeah, absolutely. So I have a system like there's systems of thought that are like at a lower kind of fourth dimensional level. But then if you go up a dimensional level, like there's belief systems that are more kind of generalized, right? So you have like belief system or specific like Buddhism or like Hermeticism. But if you think about it, Buddhism and Hermeticism have very similar goals and similar orientations. They both have a kind of a sense of oneness of the universe. There's both a kind of a de-emphasis on the individual and an emphasis on a larger sort of collective self. And I think there's a kind of, and if you strip away the archetypes and the specific religions, you see that there's a kind of a meta religion that all of those kind of connect to. And I think likewise, like nihilism is also kind of like the negative version of that. So you take all the kind of the negative belief systems or the darker, you know, occult systems of thought, maybe like your Satanism. And then there's a kind of a meta chaos sort of perspective. So it's kind of like it's a Russian nesting doll where the further you go up, the more like expansive. So where was I going to go with that? But yeah, it really kind of depends. Like, I think there's the way I kind of have it in my system is that there's this concept called the Zerfikes, which is essentially kind of like a belief system that becomes your universe. And we exist among a bunch of them, but there's different kind of levels to them. So you have like the regular Zerfikes, which are just kind of belief system, but then you have the meta Zerfikes, which encompass all the smaller Zerfikes within it. So to answer your question, Indy, yeah, I think you can have a system that is more comprehensive, but I think that at the same time, I think if you become too focused on order or too focused on chaos, that can be a limiting in terms of imagination and scope as well. And I think a lot of people in the spiritual community, they don't want to think too much about chaos because they don't like that that maybe things don't quite fit to some perfect plan or they don't fit to some kind of perfect structure. But what I find is that when you explore chaos, you find higher forms of order that you never knew about before. And it's only by accepting the chaos in this world that you can find the order that exists beyond it. Because if you get too fixated on the lower level order and you don't really look at some of the higher, deeper levels of order, but in order to get to those higher, deeper levels of order, you kind of have to see past some stuff that's, maybe you have to deal with some, like Indy, he talks about like the shadow. You have to deal with those darker aspects. Because I think sometimes with belief systems, we can kind of create this like very purified Disneyland kind of, happy-go-lucky belief system, but it may not prepare us for the actual trials and tribulations in life and all the tragedy that can happen. But I think sometimes by embracing that sort of that more disorderly side of the universe, you can find deeper connections of order by kind of going across these sort of abyssal gaps. And because like my general orientation, my sort of philosophical kind of like perspective on things is like when I see an abyss, I assume there's something on the other side of that abyss. I don't think that the abyss stops with the abyss. There's just gaps between dimensions. And if you can kind of traverse the gap and you can traverse that dark abyss, there might be an exotic paradise that lays on the other side. That's kind of how that was with me and the Fae, because in order to get to their sort of world, you have to kind of get beyond just sort of the black membrane that surrounds reality. And when you pierce through it, you find a whole different world that you never knew about before, that a world that hasn't even been talked in, text or scriptures. But in order to do that, you have to get behind certain assumptions and certain beliefs because I think in a way beliefs can limit us. And by that, it's like, if you think about consciousness and you think about the universe as a dream, basically wherever you believe, whatever you believe is ultimate reality becomes the edge of your dream world. It becomes the edge of your reality. So always being open to new possibilities and mysteries and the idea that there's something beyond the scope of what you believe, I think that is a true, deep freedom. But I don't think it's necessarily, comfortable at all times. It can be kind of challenging because you're dealing with a lot of alienness and a lot of vastness. But I think overall it's rewarding, and that's basically the path that I'm going on.
Yeah, that's interesting. You took me on a flashback to London transport system, Mind the Gap. And it's something you hear every day. And I used to love that about taking the tubes in London, because every time they tell you to mind the gap, there's a deeper element, mind the gap. What gap? What is this gap all about? And I like that you mentioned a few things, like you mentioned chaos. And what I would define as loosely and possibly ineloquently as divine order. But let me take you on a little journey, a little one, not too long. The idea of the fractal universe that we're living in. So everything seems to repeat itself. The same mathematics seems to be representing the repetition. And the same golden phi spiral that governs the mitochondrial DNA governs the galaxy. And so, the way things form, there seems to be this universal pattern. The way the leaves are aligned on a tree, the way the branches grow on a tree, they all follow this divine framework, this divine pattern. And so it seems to me that there's this universal law, if I can call it that is basically imprinting itself upon every aspect of reality. And this is where I come out with this idea of a fractal. I really do believe, sincerely, that if I shrink smaller than my body, and I shrink smaller than the cells of my body, and if I shrink smaller than the mitochondrial DNA, and I keep shrinking beyond getting smaller, beyond the atoms of the minerals, beyond the quarks that make up those atoms, beyond the gluons that hold those atoms together, I think I would be coming back in from the galaxies, and I would be shrinking in from a multi-galactic perspective, and keep shrinking until I'm as small as the solar system. So to me, that continuity seems to be reflected. And so there seems to be this divine connection between the smallest thing and the greatest thing. And that divine connection seems to be able to be seen here as principles, mathematics, Maat, as the ancient Egyptians called it. And it's where we get meter, measuring, timing, meter, music. So everything seems to be an emanation of the vibrational field. When we look at the Hermetics principles, makes sense. Every religion speaks about how there was first sound, whether you're coming from, Abrahamic or the ancient Greek or the Taoist or the Indian, the Aum, wherever you go, the shamanic tradition speaks about the heartbeat of the universe, that there's this rhythm underlying everything, and that rhythm is the basis of dream time, and that the dream time is 3 different dreams that are working together to produce this 4th dream time of physical manifestation. So when I look at all of this, I see, what I see is a connection between all things. Namaste, dear Vincent. How are you doing? I hope you are good and smiling and thriving and having a great weekend. So, yeah, that makes me think about synchronicity. There are different forms of synchronicity. So the synchronicities that we see in time, repeating the moments, repeating things, right? That the future and the past are fundamentally connected, are represented in this reality. Can you guys hear my son in the background? He's crying on the other side of the house because I took his tablet away from him. He was being rude. He kicked my dog. You do not kick my dog, ever. Daddy takes action. It's a 60-kilogram Malamute, for crying out loud. What do you want to kick that dog for?
Yeah,
Of all dogs to kick. I mean, he's a gentle giant. That's why he knows he can get away with it. But even gentle giants have a limit, you know? And but he's highly intelligent. So even if he did have to take action, he would be careful. But regardless, so 6 a.m. Hawaii, you got your coffee. Phew, nice, Vincent, nice. Good way to start the day, man. 6:30, good old-fashioned podcast. So when I look at the synchronicities that we see in time, and there are many different types, like I think you were pointing out, Cosmic. One form of synchronicity is how what happened in the past will repeat itself in the future, right? Civilizations will be born, and civilizations will die, and civilizations will be born from the ashes of those, and they will die. And I will be born, and I will die, and my child will be born from me and die. And so there's this continual cycles of beginnings and endings that seem to emerge from each other. The same way that cells differentiate, the same way that galaxies, solar systems emerge from other systems. And there seems to be this universal principle of proverbial repetition. So we see everything as chakra, spinning, turning, revolving. And everything gets back to the beginning, fundamentally, the alpha and the omega. Where are things at? Aleph, Tav, at. So that's the first and last of the Paleo-Hebrew or the Phoenician alphabet, which is what we use today to define where something's at. It's the beginning and the ending of something, which is a division. And when something's at that point, it divides from where it could be or where it isn't, right? That's an interesting concept. So you got these divisions of synchronicity that represent the synchronicity between how the molecules are governed by phi, in the same way that the tree grows in phi, the same way that like humans organize themselves in groups by the principle of phi. Populations work according to phi. You can pretty much calculate just about everything with phi. Even the way that planetary systems and galactic events are occurring seem to follow this. What we consider gravitational expressions or electrical expressions, these all seem to be following similar suits of pattern. And everything seems to be locked in this divine pattern. So there's a synchronicity between the smallest thing and the biggest thing, holding the same fundamental key. Then there's a synchronicity between the past and the future. Then there's a synchronicity in the present between two different points in space. Then there's a synchronicity in the present between two different people in two different situations. But I think they're all the universal synchronicity. It's all just synchronicity. And that synchronicity, which is the scale of life, which is the expressions of the fractal forms of consciousness that manifests all the worlds and all the universes and all the aspects of creation that we are bound through, that emanates time from the past to the future as a cosmic expression of polarity. I think everything is really just that one principle. And that one principle ties everything together. So this sort of, to me, makes sense. Like, it adds up to some of the things that you're saying, Cosmic. And I got to go and talk to my son quickly. I got to go and let him know that I'm actually going to start deleting games unless he stops, because he's giving his mom a hard time. I might be deleting games. I'll be back in a mo.
Yeah, the synchronicity of the connection between the past and the future is an interesting one. I feel like there's a common expression that people hear is that uh, if we don't learn about our history, we'll repeat the same mistakes of the past, something to that effect.
Yeah, those who don't learn history are doomed to repeat it, I think is the quote.
Yes, that's what it is. Thank you, sir. And so, in a way, I feel like there's an obvious um, awareness of the connection between the repeating aspect of the past into the future, and but there's also some kind of an aspect that we can kind of change that cycle or that repetition. And so, if we can understand the past and what those cycles are, we can learn from those now and then change the cycles, potentially altering the timelines so that once we've changed things now, that those things that had happened in the past can be undone potentially and then create a new timeline. I've had experience of this, and there's literature on this stuff. It's kind of hard to wrap your mind around the idea because you come from one timeline where things are so familiar, and then you do something based on information from the past that changes the entire timeline, and now you have no memory of that previous timeline necessarily, maybe a glimpse, but you now have memory of a new timeline that you thought was always the case. And so how can we know about this without that glimpse to be able to tell something's different now? There was a previous timeline. And so we talk about sometimes in the show how the Mandela effect can kind of be a highlight of those glimpses that we might see of altering timelines. Some people may come from different ones. Makes me wonder that people with maybe different circles of thought may have different timelines. Could be interesting.
I like that. I like that as an idea. Just before we continue, I want to welcome dear Silas to the platform. Those of you who don't know, Silas Speaks. It's literally at Silas Speaks in YouTube. You can find his channel. He does a lot of good work, a lot of deep occult analysis of various different principles, especially how it relates to the world where we're in right now. He's been doing a lot of specialization, looking at a lot of the Saturn moon connection and such. So go and check him out. He's really cool. Welcome. It's an honor to have you here, dear Silas. Silas is a researcher. He does his homework. He spends a lot of time looking at things. And how you doing, man? Tell us, give us a little bit about yourself, brother.
Pleasure to be here. And I'm doing perfectly fine. I'm eager to speak about synchronicity and such. It's a fascinating topic.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, the synchronicity is one of those things, and it's really interesting. Like I have how can I put it? Yeah, man. Big love, Vincent. Shalom. Like my ex-wife used to have a hard time with me because I'd get somewhere and I'd sit down and she'd be like, where are we going? I'd be like, no, we got to wait here. She'd be like, what do you mean we got to wait here? We got to wait here. Something's going to happen. And we're waiting. Like, nothing's happening. She's like getting impatient. I'm like, no, we got to wait. We're going to wait. When the time's right, we're going to wait. And she'd be like getting nervous. Like, And I'm like, that's the thing about the guides. The guides are interesting. And I'm sure, Cosmic, you'll have a lot to say about this. The guides will give you a hint. They'll be like, dude, that tree, sit under that tree. Just sit there and wait. You'll be like, seriously, you want me to sit and wait under the tree? Okay. So if you're faithful about that, then you're faithful about like, okay, so there's some kind of a synchronous thing going to happen. So I just got to sit and wait for it. And can we drive synchronicity? Is faith, okay, oh, now we're getting into the waters of the deep, deep waters of faith. What is faith? Like I always embrace faith as being an expression of divine understanding, the recognition that the understanding is holding the space of wisdom within it, and that from this springs true knowledge, and this child of knowledge holds the key and the powers of the lightning bolt, or the sword of heaven, as we could call it, or the enad, the 10 sephirot, and expressions of the chakric potential. And so, there seems to be this purpose, divine purpose, that's been written into the plan. And it's like we can access this divine purpose. And I can't believe we don't really use this diagram very often on the show. Like, wow, what a great chance to just throw it out there. And I got another fun one to throw here. One of the ones I love. We got it looking all Masonic. Let's leave them out of this conversation for now. But just looking at the divine proportions of these flowers and observing, like when you look at this flower of life, right? If you allow your consciousness, that point here, I hope you can see my mouse. That point here is the corner of a cube, where my mouse is. Corner of a cube. Corner of a cube. Corner of a cube. Front corner of a cube. This is the edge of a cube of two faces. And there's a face up here. And there is the bottom face. So you can see there's a cube in here, Metatron's cube. If you allow your consciousness to just zone out of it, it looks like a cube. And as you look at that, you'll start noticing, like you can expand this bigger and see there's more geometry going on there. Like the cube is part of something else. And you can also see the tetrahedron in there as well. If you really want to allow your awareness, there's a lot going on. So the fact that in this picture there's something else that's being implied, I think that's the nature of reality. I think reality that we experience are the implications of these interactions. But we get so lost in the implications of these interactions that we get stuck in the cube. And we forget that the cube is made out of all of these little flowers. And that all of these flowers are really just interactions between different circles. And that the interactions between different circles, each one goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then that becomes another octave here. And so we've got all these octaves, and each petal becomes another series of interactions. And so, for example, can you guys see my mouse, by the way?
Yes.
So we've got a petal here. Look at this petal of this flower. You notice how the petal of this flower is shared between two flowers. Wow. And then you notice that this petal of this flower, right, shared between two flowers, is part of a circle. So there's some kind of a resonance between this petal and this petal. And this petal also is part of the same circle. And this petal also, and this petal also. But the outer edge of this petal is more related to this petal than the inner edge of any of these petals. So the outer edge of this petal is more related to this petal, even though the inner edge of this petal has some kind of relation to this too. So there seems to be a diagram here speaking of relationships and how things are more related than what we seem to be. And that's just looking at the petals, right? Like you could look at it from other perspectives. You could see these. What are these? These are not quite triangles, are they? But they look like funky, like triangular concepts that are based on crescents. And we see the same thing here with these crescents, right? These crescents are reflecting the tetrahedrons pulling in different directions, here and here. And then we see the same thing here and here. Then we see, as you look around, you can allow your focus to fall on different parts of it. You can focus on the petals, you can focus on the triangular bits, you can focus on the relationships between the petals, you can focus on the relationships of the circles, you can allow your awareness to pull back and see the circles and see all the circles and the relationships, and you see all these spheres lumped together, it looks like cells. Or you can pull your consciousness back and see the dynamic shapes bound within it. And so there's, already we're seeing like a series of synchronicities that seems to be like such a powerful reflection. And I think the reason why this image was so universally used as a profound concept that relates to the divine proportions of time and space and consciousness is because what we're looking at here is really, would I be wrong to go out on a limb and call it the map of synchronicity?
No, I think that's spot on. There's so many elements there involved that it's hard to see them all at once. You have to kind of shift your mind to be able to see so many different things in here. But I imagine ultimately you could get really good understanding of where to shift to and know all the different aspects that you can move to. I've started to see things that I've never noticed before. Like I usually see the asterisk of the little Vesica Pisces shapes, but I've also noticed now that you can look at these concave triangles that are within the convex triangles or vice versa, and you can look
Exactly.
at a circle of triangles, which is really cool. I never noticed that.
I mostly see hexagons actually on this one.
Oh, cool.
It's
Yeah,
very non-Euclidean
Exactly.
in that it's kind of its round sort of
hexagons.
shape. I can see the cube too. It's kind of like a weird, bumpy Jello mold cube.
I'm having a hard time seeing the cube. I hope to see it.
It's a Minecraft cube. Yeah, so like, you know, I think that this is like a map of synchronicity. When I look at this, I see like, oh wow, all these things are connected to other things in subtle relationships. And these subtle relationships all sort of bind, you know, bind reality in a sense. And so to me, this is an expression of the macrocosm, and that like we are all like little flowers, and we repeat ourselves outside of ourselves, and we repeat ourselves outside of ourselves. And it's so beautiful the way the one flower and the other flower become, you know, expressions of each other, you know, if that makes sense. Like
Yeah,
there's this beautiful beautiful harmony here between energy and form being expressed. And like you mentioned, these little triangles, like I don't even know what to call them. Like, I call them tricrescents, right?
Yes.
Because they're like three little crescents, like bowing like in the shape of a triangle. And then you've got other tetrahedrons forming within the structure here as well, when you look at that, which is really interesting. And so, you know, the whole structure's got so much going on, and it sort of points out to us that the multiplicity of form really is an expression of the monad. And I think that that's like basically universal, whether you come from the perspective of ancient Greek or the Kabbalah, or, you know, most of the mystery religions seem to point out the same thing. In the Vedic cosmology, they speak about, you know, the Parabrahm, you know, and how all of these emanations spring from a single point. And so to me, I think like when I think of synchronicity, I think of that reality is a dream, and that the dream time is structured together, and that there are borrowed pieces. I hope that makes sense when I say borrowed pieces. Like there are only so many potential mixtures. Like, think about this. There's another human being in the world that has got a lot of the same borrowed pieces that you've got to make you who you are. And those borrowed pieces might not be exactly the same as yours. But there are going to be other people that look like you. There are going to be other people that speak like you. There are going to be other people that walk like you, act like you, react like you. There are going to be some people that walk like you and speak like you. There are going to be some people that walk like you, speak like you, and talk like you. Maybe even walk like you, speak like you, talk like you, think like you and look like you. You know, the doppelganger effect. And I think it's because the universe has to reappropriate. It's only got so many different things that are repeated. And it's like a mathematical code. Like the same pattern seems to be resplendently reflecting the same ideas put together in a slightly different idea. And so this whole idea of individuality, which I think is a valid and real phenomenon because we can all experience it, sort of also points back at the universal aspect of each being, each soul, and this expression of consciousness, and how, everything is really dependent upon everything else. And this notion of codependency in relationships, I love that. Like when I look at that and I'm like, yeah, well, I don't like those words. I see where they're coming from, that there's negative codependent potential, right? But like everything is codependent. Like there is no escape from codependency. There's just, from my perspective, healthy codependency and unhealthy codependency. And healthy codependency means that you are within your own sovereign potential and grounded and keeping it real. But to think that your feelings are not dependent upon another human being, I don't think it's real. Like, I'll give you an example. My son's mom. So her mom's in hospital right now. And her feelings are affecting me. We're not that close, like on any emotional level or anything. My girlfriend is my girlfriend, and her and me split up 5 years ago. But like, I feel the impacts and the pressures of her emotional field the same way I would feel the emotional impacts of a homeless guy today in the shop. Okay, so let me tell you a little story. That happened this morning. So I come in to the shop after climbing down the mountain, and I needed to get some bread, a few odds and ends, right? Some fruit. And there was a homeless guy there, and he was like, "Hey man, can you get me something?" I was like, "Yeah, of course I'll get you something." So I was going to buy bananas. So I thought, I'll buy a big bunch of bananas. Bananas look nice, so I'll give him like a handful of bananas. And then I thought, let me go and see if they've got the fresh at that shop, because it was the morning. They make these fresh, what they call vet cook. It's a kind of a thing that they make in the shop. I don't know what you call it in English. Anyway, regardless. And I thought, those will be like nice and warm and fresh. So I grabbed him a couple of those, and I thought I'll give him those, and I'll give him a bunch of bananas, and that'll be like something for him to eat for now. So anyway, I'm at the counter, and he comes in, and he starts like da 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 da, and he speaks to the lady behind the counter, an African lady that I know, and I've got good relations with everybody in my neighborhood, right? And so I'm always like, I have conversations with her. I speak to her. How are you? She's a lovely lady. The guy who owns that shop is a good friend of mine. His family, his brothers are friends of mine. The guys who work there, the guy who's the cleaner there, he's a good buddy. Joshua loves him to bits. He's all over Joshua. So anyway, like that's how it is. I know all the ladies there who work behind the other counters where they make all the hot foods and stuff, and like little bakery section and stuff. And so I go through the shop and I say hello to everybody. Everybody's like it's like a big family kind of thing. And so anyway, this guy comes in, he's rude to this woman. So I'm like a little, don't like the tone of his voice towards her. And so she like says, no, like you're being a bit much, because he was being like overtly, his way was a bit aggressive and abrupt and he says, I'm busy with this customer. So what it turned out was that he wanted to, he didn't want something to eat. He decided, no, he felt like a can of soda pop. And, which I wouldn't buy on principle anyway. I explained it to him when I came out of the shop, because I don't buy soda pop. Not for myself, not for my son, not for my family. I don't believe in supporting these companies that make poison. To me, it's an ethical decision. It's a position where I am. Like I don't want to support Coca-Cola, for example. And the only thing I would use Coca-Cola for is cleaning jewelry. And that's if I'd rather not use it. I'd rather use something else. Support a different company. So anyway, he starts getting aggressive with this woman and raising his voice. I'm like, dude, you need to chill out. So the other African guy who was busy unpacking shelves comes and he says, no, bro, don't be like this. Because he's like, the lady's there. And I'm saying to the guy, dude, seriously, like, you can't be like this. Then he threatens the guy next to me. He says, no, I'm going to get you when you're outside. And I'm going, seriously? Now you're getting aggressive and you're like getting violent, like, the violent aggression. And so I was just like, seriously, dude, like, I don't know what's wrong with you. Please, maybe you should go outside. And I explained to him nice. I said, look, these people, they have got a business here, and they don't want their customers to feel harassed in any way, or bullied by you. So they have an interest in what's going on in the shop here, which is why they control the space, which is their prerogative completely. You got to respect that. And so he was like, yeah, okay. So anyway, he goes back outside because he's making a scene. And now, like, all the shop people are coming. They're like saying to him, dude, no, because he's been rude to the lady behind the counter. This is what happens, right? So anyway, my point is the synchronicities, how these things come together. Right now in the world, there's a lot of disassociation. There's a lot of anger, right? That aggression and that is connected to what's going on in the USA right now, right? There are all these protests happening. Are they not? They're still happening? Maybe you guys can tell me.
Oh, yeah, they're definitely still going on.
People are throwing firecrackers and bricks, and people are being beaten up by cops with batons, and special forces, military, I don't know who, like this group and that group are all being involved. And there's like people are getting arrested, people are getting hurt, people are getting afraid. And it's not just happening there. I bet it's blowing up in Europe by now, because this is what happened. It happened before COVID. Remember? Sometime before. I even wonder whether what happened in COVID was a bid to try and control that. That's another element of the conversation. How the puppet masters manipulate the system when this becomes too explosive. But like, so from my perspective, seeing that in my shop, to me, from a shamanic perspective, that's connected to what's going on in the world. Because that doesn't normally happen there, right? I never see that in my shop. I come in there, it's all loving vibes, everything's good. I see like homeless people, I give them like fruits, I give them bananas, like, I'm the guy who gives them fruit. Why? I don't buy like packaged stuff, because I know that they'll take it in their bag and walk down the road and swap it to another shop, get money for it and collect up money and then go and buy drugs, right? Or business. I'd rather give them like something they're going to eat, which they can't really return easily to anybody else. Same as like in India, like if you're going to give a banana to a street child in India, make sure you crack the banana. Otherwise, the bigger kids are going to come to that child and take it off of them, and they're going to collect them up and go and try and haggle with the banana sellers to get money for it. This is what happens. So, make sure that the little child you're giving the fruit to is going to get to eat that fruit. If it's cracked, there's no good for it going anywhere else. He may as well eat it because he can't sell it, or he can't give it to the bigger boys as like collateral. So anyway, there
was a huge protest of 2 million people in Hong Kong right before COVID was released, and it's thought that the COVID was released to stop these protests. 2 million people in Hong Kong, that's a big protest.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
It was happening
Franklin,
in France. It was happening in Germany. Oh, sorry.
Everywhere. No, you can finish your point.
It's happening in France all the time.
Well, I was just saying it was happening in every country. France, there was like continually police cars being burnt. It was happening in Ireland. Was it happening in Scotland?
No, it was not. No.
Yeah, I know there was like the 5G thing happened around that time, and a lot of people were protesting 5G. Was that what it is?
So
there wasn't really any protests in Scotland. It was more in England. Scotland was very Scotland. Funnily enough, in contrast to Braveheart, we've always been sort of authority loving in Scotland, or so I've noticed at least. Unfortunately, so. But yeah.
Yeah, but the Scots also feel protected from what's going on in the world, because there's a hereditary, like we're hiding behind our wall, right? Like in ancient times, they had the wall, didn't they?
Yeah, we're on the hoary cliffs of Scotland, and we're towering above everyone else. We're sort of on a mountainous island away from the rest of the world. That is the sort of mentality. Absolutely, yeah.
So people tend to be more chilled out, and the Scots are like, they'll chill out until they have to, and then they'll get their kilts on and get out their swords,
Yeah, I think it's probably similar to the Irish in that regard, but the Irish don't have the cliffs, so, or not as many of them, so yeah, maybe that mindset isn't as ingrained as it is in Scotland.
Do you know anything about the Rosalind Church in Scotland? It's thought that the Knights Templar had their beginning there, like even as far back as the 1400s.
Oh yeah, I've been to Roslin Chapel many times. It's a very, very fascinating building. In fact, it was to be expanded into a cathedral, but for whatever reason, I think they believe it was something to do with funding. It never went ahead, but it's absolutely chock full of symbolism. I mean, honestly, we'd be here for probably 2 weeks just speaking about all of the symbolism. It's a very small room as well, where most of the symbolism takes place. Yeah, but yeah.
You know, the Scottish Freemasonry, and it's thought that it had older roots than is known, and they go back to Rosalind Chapel.
Yeah, absolutely. With the Sinclairs, they also have a very interesting set of masonry there, where it shows corn, cacti. Now, this is a building that was ostensibly created in I believe, the 13th century.
Yeah.
So, of course, the New World wasn't discovered at that point. So, where did they get this from? There's also some diaries from some of the Sinclair family members about strange expeditions to Western lands, which, when you read them, they sound almost like they've been to the New World. But yeah, the Templars are at least the Scottish Templars that were hiding out there after 13. That would have been 30. It's either 1312 or 1315, where Jacques de Molay was obviously put to the stake.
Yeah.
They fled to Scotland. They aided in the War of Independence in Scotland against the English at that time, at the Battle of Bannockburn, supposedly. And but there's a lot of interconnection between the symbolism of the Templars and the Freemasons. So yeah, you could say it's synchronicity, you know?
Yeah, it's thought that the Knights Templar went to Nova Scotia long before, Columbus and them came through from Portugal and Spain. But there's a lot of new relics that are being found over in Nova Scotia. Knight Templar swords have been found just off the coast. So we have to get some dating on those.
Yeah, I wouldn't be
it's
surprised.
very
You know,
interesting history.
when I went to Nova Scotia, have you been there, Silas?
I haven't. No, I haven't. I should
You ought
probably
to go there.
Yeah.
It'll blow your mind because they still have traditional Scottish. Like, I was expecting Edinburgh and the Highlands to be like that. And when I went to Edinburgh and the Highlands, I was like, oh, it's not like Nova Scotia. I thought like everybody's going to be like walking around wearing kilts, playing bagpipes, speaking like a real Scotchman. Like I have literally been in conversations with people in a restaurant and in a pub where I have to turn around to someone and say, what language is he speaking? And everybody's laughing at me. And they're like one of them can speak like a little, like more like the English sound that I know. And he's explaining to me that he's speaking English, son. Like this is like, decades ago. And I'm like, wow. And I have to sit and really wrap my head around it. But I've often wondered how much of the history has been re-represented because, maybe Scotland wasn't just a tiny little place. Maybe Scotland was a bigger thing in ancient times. Yeah. And that, Nova Scotia, we call it Nova Scotia, but there seems to be a lot of history there. And I don't think the history goes back to just the recent history that we're expected to believe. Anyway, I found
I agree. Yeah, I agree. You have a lot of monolithic, supposedly Neolithic monuments that are, they're Herculean, really, construction projects. You have the likes of Clavacairn, and the precision as well. They're all very precisely aligned to certain astronomical patterns within the sky and phenomena. And you also have places up in Orkney and even in the islands of Scotland, which rather peculiar. They're even of a more monumental nature, which tells you there was some sort of civilization in Scotland or ancient Scotland at that point that had the logistics, it had the resources, it had it had the scholars to develop these sites and construct them. So yeah, I agree.
Yeah, the historians put the Knights Templar in Nova Scotia around 1398, sometime around May or June, according to stories. Although that may not have been the first voyage. But no, by Herculean, is that synonymous with megalithic or cyclopean masonry?
Yes, it's what I've seen, for example, with Clavacairn. It's you typically, I've never seen this, of course, and I'm in construction, so I've never really seen this, and I can't really fathom why they would do it this way. But they take massive stone blocks. They could be, several dozen tons, and they'll simply just move them into positions that and very precise as well, where precisely aligning with astronomical phenomenon in the sky at specific times of the year, almost within a millimeter of alignment. And you're thinking, how did they do that without cranes, without of course it is possible to move it, but the amount of resources and the time to construct it is just it's mind-boggling. Which tells you, like with any construction project, you want to make it as quickly as possible. You want to keep the resources low that you expend for the project, otherwise it won't be cost effective. So it tells me they had some sort of advanced technology to create these things. Yeah, but interestingly as well, that dating would align with Roslin Chapel, I believe, if I recall correctly, roughly about that time, maybe just before. I think it was in the early 14th century, if I recall correctly.
It's amazing. The engineering is nearly unfathomable in there, and the rafters in there are very ornamental, and like the whole inside, there's so much going on in there, so many different designs and symbols and figures. So I think they've considered that it might be like a map of the heavens, like the different zodiacs and places in the sky, aligned with the sun being in a certain place at a certain time, potentially.
Yeah, you also have... Oh, jump in, Franklin.
No, please continue. Please continue. I was going to go on a tangent, but do continue.
Oh, no, I was just going to say really quickly, there's a symbol that constantly crops up within Roslin Chapel, and they call it the Green Man. I mean, essentially, it's Bacchus or Dionysus or archetypes similar to that. I mean, that archetype is cross-cultural, right? It's the sort of the savior that goes through death and resurrection. But you see the Hanged Man. You see, like what you're saying. You see various sort of proto-tarot tarot signs, or tarot card archetypes, and then you also see, you could say proto or astrological signs, essentially zodiacal signs. So absolutely, the whole thing it's completely esoteric. In fact, you could actually say it's not a Christian church, as we would know Christianity officially. It's very... I mean, whoever constructed it had a deep knowledge of... Well, even for example, there's one column that it's a vertical spiral, and if I recall correctly, I can't quite remember the details at the bottom top of the column, but if I recall correctly, when I viewed it, there was a sort of epiphany moment when I was there, that I was like, oh my God, that's what it means. And it's this idea of, you see it in the Satyr Square, right? It's with the translation of it, it's that idea of recursion, the cyclicality of all things. And this ties in with synchronicity, thinking of the world, the record of reality, that reality is almost like a phonograph machine, and the grooves of the phonograph contracting vertically into the center. It's similar to that idea. That's the realization I had with that column. But there's tons of things like that in It's very small as well, and you could spend all day just looking at the symbols. It's pretty astounding.
Yeah, apparently that spiral column is called the hazel tree. I'm gonna try to pull up an image of it.
Yeah, that's the one.
Yeah, it's interesting, you know, when we look at the ancients. And Cosmic, dear brother, there was something you wanted to add.
Never mind. That's not relevant now.
Okay. Like the idea of the you know, the totem pole, Yggdrasil, or the tree of life, or these spires that you mentioned, these shivlings as they call them in India, which represents the spiral of consciousness as a pin, if you would, which is obviously representative of the center of the galaxy. You know, the center of the galaxy, everything revolves around this point, the eye of the proverbial storm. And so this concept, I think, is universal to all of our spiritual traditions and all the spiritual knowledge that we can sort of dig up. Namaste, Zerilath. How are you doing, brother? I hope you are good. I hope you are thriving. And so yeah, this fundamental center of the universe, I think it represents how every point in time space is the center of the universe, and that all of these proverbial expressions of the center of the universe is happening individually, and how you, me, Silas, Cosmic, all of the people in the chat, we're all expressions of this proverbial center of the universe. And wow, look at that, huh? They really knew how to build, didn't they? Doesn't that make you jealous, Silas?
Oh yeah. Yep.
You don't get to build things like that in this day and age because there just isn't the money
I know.
for it.
I know.
when you should be, because like they last longer, right?
Yeah.
Like,
well, as well, they elevate the soul of man to a greater degree too. You know, I think it's more worthwhile.
absolutely. And the mathematics being expressed there. I wonder what the ratio is of that spiral ascending there. Eh?
Mm.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like, if I look at that spiral, right? That spiral seems to be so the first one goes round, then it goes to, what is that? Is that 2.25 times around that pillar? Revolutions
It
of
appears to be,
that
yeah.
rising.
Yeah. 2.25,
Interesting.
I would say, yeah.
I think there's
You would
two
expect it to be 3.25, but 2.25. Isn't that interesting?
two spires that go up and they do one full revolution. One comes up from the back and ends in the back.
Yeah.
Maybe 3. Because the one that starts in the front right here. And
it's just such beautiful symmetry and expression, you know?
Yeah.
And you just wonder what the angle of ascent is. You know, what's this ratio that's being expressed here in terms of the space? I wonder if it would be close to phi. You know, the mind boggles. One expects that there might be some kind of a relationship with phi. No. But it's not quite it's not quite got that changeability to it, so it might have a constant version of that, if that makes sense. Maybe they brought it down to a constant and applying that on each. It's just very interesting, you know, because when we look at these ancient things, to me it seems like we've reached a point in our time right now where we've sort of lost perspective, And because we've lost perspective, we've become ingrained in these patterns, in these habits. And I think, like, to me, like when we look at time, right? So you mentioned just now, the Saturn square. Just can't get enough of the Saturn square, can you? Oof. It's just like, when I look at it, I'm like, it just makes sense. It's just, finally, there we go. There it is. That sensible, way of looking at the world. Namaste, Autician. I hope you are good. I hope you are smiling. I hope you are flying. Yeah, Vincent, that beautiful spiral was definitely foundational. It definitely makes me think of foundations. Beautiful word that sort of blows it up, New Tartaria is coming, Chaos. Well, this is exactly it. Unfortunately, New Tartaria is very cheaply built. They really skimped on the building. At least the old Tartaria, they had like something really cool going on. They had like funky designs that you could really appreciate and enjoy. So like here I look at this, and I look at this polarities of the Ida, the Pingala. Let me get onto that picture. So here we go. We've got the 7, the 8, and the 9. And here we've got the 1, the 2, and the 3. And here we've got the 4, the 5, and the 6. So from the Kabbalistic perspective, these are the 3 triads of the tree of life. And the monads expressing 1, 2, 3, which becomes 6, right? And the astral triangle is expressing 4, 5, and 6, which becomes 15, which is 6, right? And then, of course, the etheric triangle is expressing 7 and 8, which is 15, plus 9, which is 24, which is 6. So yeah, we got 666, right? Sort of coming together, which is essentially 18, which is essentially, bringing us back to 9. And when we add up all of these numbers, we get 45, right? And 45 is 9 times 5, right? And 5 sits in the middle. Now 5, that pentagram, is really a perfect representation of phi. Yeah? And in the center of that pentagram, we've got 5. Everything revolves around 5. Mercury, the mercurial presence, the potentials of Mercury. And so, yeah, the Axis Mundi, Silas is speaking about it here in the chat, the Axis Mundi, the tree of life, that 5 represents the Axis Mundi in a sense. And you can see how, between the line of 4 and 6, you got a representation of the Axis Mundi, because like 4 is the point of rest. 5 is the dynamism added to 4 in order to produce the harmony of 6. So the 4, 5, 6 is what keeps everything in a state of harmony. It's the eye of the proverbial storm, 4. And 6 is the expression of harmony. So we've got a toric field here being expressed. And the Axis Mundi, which is representing the forces of centrifugal and centripetal forces that we get from a chakra or a spinning thing. Things that revolve have these 2 principles, which reflect, once again, another synchronicity, the forces of creation and the forces of destruction, as there are like this in the symphony of dance, the preservation of matter, the preservation of cells in the body, that some cells have to pass away so that other cells can be born, so that you can keep the balance and the harmony. And this dynamic principle of 5 in the center speaks to us about 5 phi, right? No accident there that phi and 5, it's in the word. And the word vibe, to vibe, vibration. So, vibration is emitted from the sphere of 6, you see. So 4 is that stationary point of rest. 5 is that principle of movement. And 6 is the expression of vibration. because movement is expressed as 6. So obviously 6 a number Venus, vibration, music, tones. So we see how the ancients came up with the concepts related to the numbers, numerology, and how they came up with the principles related to the planetary numerological association. So it's very interesting when we bring this little picture onto the scale here. Now we start to look at this in a very interesting way as well. Let me just check if we've got someone else joining us. No. Is Indie Stage off the stage? Oh, no, that's the picture you had. Okay, good. Just checking. Everybody's here. But yeah, so, I think like when we look at the Saturn story here, right? Look at the synchronicities. 9 plus 6, 15. Yeah. 10 plus 5, 15. 6 plus 9, 15. 6 plus 9, 15. Everything comes back to 15. And 5 being in the center. Take the center, 5, Mercury, out of the picture, and everything adds up to 10. So then we've got the 10 Sephirot being represented, right? Which in itself, I think, is quite an interesting concept, when we take the divine cross. So we say a cross 6 and 4 is 10, 8 and 2 is 10, 3 and 7 is 10. So everything revolves around this 5. And of course, 10 being an expression of, well, there are 9 numbers here, all 9 digits. There are 9 blocks. So this is the Vedic astrological chart, of course. And these 9 expressions of number, now this is why we're talking about the breath, right? Numa and numer. I think there's a connection between the concept of numer and numer. And I think they have a lot to do with the breath. And they have a lot to do with these cosmic principles that are little engines through which life can sort of propagate. And so we see the mystic 9 becomes 10. So this is why the Kabbalah speaks about there are 10 Sephirot, not 9, not 11. The Sefer Yetzirah is quite clear on this. The Zohar also bounces around these ideas, maybe in a slightly more abstract way. But so we can see, these principles here, and the principle of the Ida and the Pingala as being opposite pulling directions. And literally, you'll see the same idea if you look at a Kundalini Chakra, Ida Pingala. Let's see. Is that going to be overload for Google AI? Is it going to have a freak out session? Is it going to drop its... No, don't say that. So there's a good image that I think gets the job done. So we can see the same idea here. You don't talk about Google dropping its panties because Google will get offended. Google doesn't wear panties. So not as far as I know, not yet anyway. I'm sure they're working on getting Google a set. But yeah, we can see, the ideas of the rotational axis, right? And that this goes here, goes here, goes here, goes here, goes here. And so there's these ideas of the serpent going, 1. So here's 1, 2, 3.5, right? Cycles to get to the Samadhi Nadi, if you can call it that. So we see the same idea here as is expressing the notion of this rotational forces moving in opposite directions, if you will. So I don't know, what do you guys think? Silas, you mentioned this. Do you have any crank? Is Silas with us?
I don't know. I don't hear him. Maybe he went to the other room or something.
Okay.
One thing synchronicity is that the hazel tree that we were mentioning before is also considered to be the Yggdrasil on the bottom, with the Axis Mundi coming up, with the foliage coming up from the dragon of the Yggdrasil at the bottom. which kind of ties in with this whole thing of the spine of the cross of Saturn and the
Are you talking about this pillar?
yeah.
So this thing is called the hazel tree, is it?
Yeah, it's called the hazel tree. But in
Beautiful.
the delineations of it, it said that the little character on the very bottom is the dragon of the Yggdrasil tree. And there's a story that the master that was building the temple had to go abroad to expand his skills and knowledge and wisdom. And when he returned, he found that the apprentice had worked to build the most glorious pillar. And he was so angered that he murdered the apprentice. And there's little dots here and there amongst the chapel featuring elements of that event with the apprentice and the master squabbling and all that over this pillar. So there's a lot of really deeply imbued symbology with it. And I think there's two straight vertical pillars that are beside it, and it's the central pillar, which represents the unification of the two poles, oppositorium coincidentium, something of the sort.
Yeah, it's very interesting when we start to put pictures out, and here again, there's a synchronicity that's right in front of our faces, right? The synchronicity that a concept can be expressed as a picture. What do you think about that, Cosmic? How does that work for you? Like the idea that a picture can hold conceptual potential.
Absolutely.
Is it just me, or is that quite incredible?
I mean, if you think about it, like an image, it holds data, it holds, experiences. I mean, if you look at like any kind of like house, you can tell how old it is, whether something's been damaged or not. Like we kind of like wear our history on our appearances, in a way. So yeah, I think images are definitely kind of a way to sort of like compress a lot of information into a small sort of spot, but it's kind of like it's like a visual form of information.
Yeah, it blows my mind that that creation, everything seems to be like a content of information, and we look at the word information, and it's like it's based around form. Yeah, so form in, so it comes from within, and yeah, outtition completely. To say a picture is 1,000 words.
Yeah, outtuition. Like instead of intuition, it's outtuition. It's a nice little play on words there. I like it.
And Mexico is saying here it relates to the seen and the unseen, and I like that because that's, I suppose, what symbolic expression is all about, right? Because the word sim and symmetry, and shows that like this is that, but that is this. So there's this left and right being implied, but you're looking at it from one perspective. So you're seeing the one side, but there's always another side to a symbol. And we forget that words are symbols too. And so I think we get so caught up in expressing meanings. And I think this is a big part of the problem in the modern world we're living in. That we've forgotten. Like when I mention things like that J and G is the same letter, people look at me. And I'm going, just do this. Forget what it means. Just close your eyes and go, G, G. Feel the vibrations in your mouth. G. Now go, J, J. The vibration's in the same place on the palate. It's the same place in the mouth. It's the same letter. It's just inside out. It's almost like the vibration's running that way. Now it's running that way. And when you go P or you go F, F, P, P, it's the one is soft. So everything seems to have this dual expression. If we look at the letters, the actual letters that we use, and we forget how many of these letters have got this really subtle duality to them, r or r, as they say in some languages. T or th, th, th. There's a masculine and feminine element being expressed there. And k or s, the way C is used, not by accident. And then we look at he, bear, bear, he, hat, bear. So you see there's a connection even with other letters. So it seems to me that there's this very interesting relationship with sounds that we've been taught to ignore because we're so stuck on what we think a word means. I think in the old times, words' meanings were not based upon finite things. I think the subtle enunciations of the word would change the meaning. So the word live and the word love is the same word, but the subtle enunciations of the vowel, changed how, because live and love are the same thing if you think about it. Like you love living. Like living is an expression of love, because you wouldn't exist if your mother and your father didn't go like, hey, let's get some loving going. And there had to be a lot of love to get you to be alive. Your parents had to sacrifice themselves, even animals, make certain self-sacrifices in order for the offspring to survive, in order to be able to. So we are like little bundles of love. That's what it means to be alive when I think about it. Namaste, occult examiner. How goes your occult examinations? I hope that everything's going well, that you're thriving, that there are no, not too many challenges running through your world. It is a challenging time, though. So yeah, I think like when we look at these subtle principles and we see this idea here, and I wanted to like really get into this in breath, out breath idea, right? In breath, out breath, in breath, out breath. So to me, when I look at this, I see something quite profound. Yeah. I see that the breath contains like the mysteries of all things. And we see it again as well, right? Like we were talking about, whether we are focused on the petals, or whether we're focused on the tiny little triangles, or whether we're focused on the tetrahedrons, or whether we're focused on the cubes. Whichever way we do it, it all comes to the same point, doesn't it? In fact, I see pyramids in here too, So, like to me, I think like the breath is the most profound thing to look at. And does not breath connect us? Is there not a synchronicity through breath? Am I not breathing out the same air that you're breathing in? Isn't that a kind of an expression of synchronicity? And if we're breathing the same air, then the same life force is animating your body that's animating my body. And the same air from the past and the future is the same air. It's just being recycled. So the past and the future are connected through the breath. You and me are connected through the breath. My life story, your life story is connected. And so yeah, to me, it seems like you can't really look at synchronicity without looking at its base imprint on the physical reality. And that base imprint to me seems to be fundamentally, it seems to be fundamentally expressed here. And I think Silas very well pointed out rather well, the Saturn cube, or the Saturn square, or the Saturn sigil. And look at the Saturn sigil for a moment. Isn't it interesting, right? What we've got here.
I wanted to
So
mention.
here we've got. Sorry, yeah.
In the Bagawa square here to the left of the Saturn sigil, we have the number 5, which in a lot of ways represents the Tao, the mysterious source of all things, because number 5 is not part of the the hex the hexagrams that come the trigrams. The 5 is not part of the trigrams that come from the eight numbers outside of it. And in a lot of ways, everything comes from the 5 and then returns back to the 5 in the cycle, kind of almost in a toroidal spiral.
I wanted to point something out because you're talking about Franklin, the relationship between language and to the sort of the musicality of the thing that they're referring. I think there's a kind of an interesting relationship between information and images, because in a lot of ways, if you think about older language, there was more of a one-to-one relationship with the thing that I was referring to. If you look at hieroglyphics, they're more like pictures, they're more things. But nowadays, language has become a lot more abstracted. It's a lot more because things like kanji, like a Japanese language, writing language, for example. If I look at a bunch of kanji, I'm going to have no idea what it means, but I know it means something. I know it infers something. So from that perspective, this is just raw information. But the thing is with information is that we take certain letters and symbols and we pair them with images, experiences, and things and so forth. So if I say the word color to someone who doesn't speak the English language, they're just going to hear the sound color. They're not going to necessarily know that I'm referring to red, blue, orange, etc. But in my mind, I hear the word color and I have an image of a rainbow that's paired with that word. So in a lot of ways, I think the problem with language is that the gap between images and information is becoming wider and wider when we feel that, it's almost like language for the sake of simplicity. We try to make the symbols as simplistic as possible. But I think in a lot of ways, we're losing some magical resolution in the same way when you take an image and you kind of stretch it out and it's got all these big pixels and you can't really see the details. I think in the same way, we're kind of doing that with symbols. It's losing. It's kind of like it's magical, mystical sort of resolution. I think you can kind of evident see that a lot of philosophers or people like Derrida who basically say that he thinks that there's really no relation, there's no meaning in text, or that it's all kind of everything kind of begins and ends with words, and words in themselves. He thought that words are completely meaningless, but I think he kind of missed. But because he was also an atheist, he didn't really believe in anything mystical. He was a kind of a communist type. But I think it highlights exactly what you're talking about, and that's what's happening culturally speaking. It's we've lost our symbols and our archetypes have so lost a meaning that people just think that it was all meaningless to begin with. They never even realized that it used to be more meaningful, and there used to be something more deeper and connecting to us, something larger. So I think in a lot of ways, information and the images, I think when we have the information sort of because if you think of something more like an abstract symbol of an eyeball or a tree or something, it's not exactly an eyeball, it's not exactly a tree, it might be poorly drawn, but what it's referring to, what experience in the world it's trying to emulate. And I think as history has progressed, that we've gone further and further away from that dynamic for the sake of simplicity. Because if you look at those those graphs of how letters have evolved over time, ancient alphabet to modern alphabet, the trend you kind of notice is everything starts to become more simplified, more kind of rudimentary, more basic, lacking any kind of expressiveness. There's not a lot of curly lines. It's very kind of formulaic and organized. And I think in a lot of ways we kind of lost some of the resolution in that in how language has evolved over time.
I like that, a loss of resolution. I think it's really a metaphor, a good way of looking at it. And I think that's so on point, And, I also like you, I can understand why it would have been done But I can also see a sinister element to it. I can see how, like, okay, so where did like all of our writing and our knowledge came from? It came from the church. They controlled it, and the kings and queens and the royalty controlled it, right? So, all of our history was written by a few people that were given, like, okay, you can write. The king would give permission. So a lot of this, I think, seems to be the control of minds, control of people. Like, I think when you're working with symbols, it's a lot harder to control someone's thoughts. Would you guys agree with that? I'll give you an example, like a painting. I can paint a painting, and it can be a powerful emotional experience, but everybody's going to get a very different experience from it. But if I write a few words, everybody's going to have the same idea. So a lot is lost in translation with symbolism. And I think there was something interesting that Mehiko mentioned earlier, adding to what you were saying about symbols being a connection between the seen and the unseen, which is obviously like where symbols have been used mostly in occult architecture, philosophies, and spiritual practices. There's also this notion of the contract, It's like you only have one part of something when you got a symbol. You don't have the whole story. And on some level, that you don't have the whole story because it's a symbol. You know that if you contemplate the symbol, it's going to reveal more. And you know that your idea and perspective on it is going to be completely different to somebody else's. If I write words, like the boy ran and jumped. It's a very clear idea, right? Everybody's thinking about a boy running and jumping. But if I paint a picture of a boy in mid-air that's jumping, you're going to have so many different perspectives on what that is. Is he falling? Is he jumping? Is he flying? So there's a lot of different things. Is he floating? Your imagination has got to work, and you got to pick one or two. With words, there's nothing to pick so much. Like, you pick the words, it's what they are. Like, he did that. Okay, so it makes it very dull and finite. There's not much that you can use your imagination to add to the story.
Well,
so
yeah,
the picture
because
is like,
if you think about it, the words are guiding the imagery, right? So you have a word, so when you're just looking at an image, there's no story being told. So you can look at the image and I'm going to come up with a story that explains this image. Whereas with a book, the story is already being explained. So it's almost like the images are actually being imposed onto your mind when you write it. And it's like you're processing the words and then you're processing the image. So it's like, for my system, you're kind of using you're thinking of two conceptual Zerfaxes at once. Whereas if you're just looking at the picture, you have a Zerfax of free space that you can kind of basically add in whatever you want. But I think sometimes with words, though, you also have to consider that, if I say that there's a dog at my front door, what kind of dog are you going to imagine? Are you going to imagine a big golden retriever? Are you going to imagine a little poodle? Are you going to imagine like a shepherd dog? Are you going to imagine like a cartoon dog with sunglasses? So I think having an imagination too is also kind of thinking about the types of images that words express. Because even when we think of images, like a tree, for example, not everybody is going to think about the exact same tree when they're told to think about a tree. Like, you might think of a regular, an apple tree, but I might be thinking of like a pine tree or a birch tree. Somebody might be thinking of a palm tree, for example. So in a lot of ways with words, there's also that flexibility too. But I think when it comes to texts, I always think about the difference between religious texts and fairy tales. See, a religious text, when you read a religious text, it's presented as sort of the truth. And it's like something that you have to follow, you have to believe, and you have to question. Whereas with fantasy and fairy tales, it's like you get the same kind of mystical knowledge, the same occult information, but it lacks that controlling authoritative aspect. You know, it's just a fun story that you can enjoy. And I think like that's kind of why in a lot of ways I feel sometimes like when it comes to like, you know, one of the reasons why I'm into like, you know, fae magic and the whole fairy thing is I think overall, if I look back at my life, I kind of feel like, you know, fantasy and fairy tales have a deeper emotional resonance with me. It's something I connected to on a deeper level. And I think one of the reasons is because of that. There's something more freeing about that. Is it's just something that kind of adds to your imaginative palette. Like you got these new ideas, you got dragons and wizards and, you know, mystical places and mystical objects, but there isn't this sense that you have to believe it. You're forced to take it in. Whereas with religion, it's like, oh, you know, you have to accept that, you know, the Garden of Eden was literal, or you have to accept that, you know, you're going to hell and this is real. It becomes very authoritative and frightening. And you feel like that story is being forced upon you. It's being forced upon your subconscious. Whereas with fantasy literature, it just kind of like sits in the, you know, the sideline. You can kind of accept it or resonate with it, well, you know, whether you want to or not. So I think that also when it comes to, you know, information and myths and the stories we tell us, and I think it's not just the language, but I think also just the general context too of, you know, is this a story that you're reading, you know, just for fun or just for insight or inspiration, or is this some, you know, authoritative text from a deity, and if you don't believe in the text, you're going to go to hell? You know, there's a very different dynamic there, and when stories are kind of forced upon us, you know, it's like we don't really have a choice in the matter. Whereas like with, you know, fiction, in a lot of ways, we can choose which fictional stories we want, which ones we resonate with. There isn't the sense of this like forced nature. And I think this kind of idea in general, I think can apply to other aspects of spirituality. And in a lot of ways, it kind of like, you know, sums up my overall philosophy on things.
Yeah, so I think I've been gathering from what you guys have been going on here about that words can really provide a little bit more clarity because they can provide more precision and accuracy referentially as to refer to something in particular. But it seems like symbols have more power for the imagination. They can really provide more expansion. And even though it's not going to pin people down to the same place, it's going to bring people to the same portal or door to be able to expand from. So it has fluidity in its ability to expand.
I think the only kind of like drawback to that is that kind of once you know what the symbol means, it doesn't have that free range power. Because like I was thinking about it, like you think about magical symbols, like astrological symbols, the Hebrew Kabbalah. It's so mystical when you first see those symbols and you have no idea what they mean. They're just these weird kind of like hieroglyphs and figures, and you're like, you kind of wonder what those means, and that intrigues your imagination, and you start to come up with ideas in your head. And I think like when it comes to like sigils or creating your own, that's what's interesting about my experiment or my my you know, Fey magic project, is that when I came up with my alphabet and I channeled it, I had no idea what any of the symbols meant. I just wrote the letters down, but with the sound associated with them. And it actually, what I did was like for like the next like 6 months to a year, I spent time like letting the symbols reveal what they actually meant. And over time, just kind of looking at them and seeing them, how they relate to the other symbols, this picture of what the symbols mean and what they refer to kind of formed organically just through studying the shape and the size and like, you know, the colors that I kind of weirdly associate with them. And so when you have a new symbol, there's like all this potential for new kinds of meaning. Whereas with a lot of us, I think one of the reasons, if you think about like the English alphabet, why it's not really very magical is because there's no mystery behind the letters. You know what the letters mean, you know what they refer to. Whereas when you look at an old alphabet, you don't necessarily have a reference point as to what the letters are referring to. And so that creates a lot more room for your imagination to explore and pontificate the potential possibilities of what those symbols mean. And I think that's why symbols are powerful, because they're more vague, they're more open to interpretation and how you conceive of them. And because they have that openness, I think in a lot of ways, they're not as quite as authoritative on your mind, and you kind of use them to your own will and use them to your own means as a way to understand the universe.
Yeah, I love that. And I love how powerful, that is. Like when you're talking about, this is the thing about our alphabets. And I think this is like important for understanding synchronicity, because the synchronicity that connects us to each other right now, the field of synchronicity, or the word. And so we find this idea of the word being resplendent and reflective of creation, and how fundamental this is towards, manifesting body and whatever aspects of ourself is being manifested here in reality. So it makes me want to look at, like, for example, like, okay, so keeping the Saturn square in mind, just to throw this back at us so we've got it fresh in our mind. Number 5 sits in the middle, Mercury. And then we've got 6 and 4. And 4 represents the rest, the stability, the grounded form, structure, planning, organizing factor. But it's very stuck. It's very stubborn, doesn't want to move. 5 represents totality of movement, but it represents movements in such a pure form of movement that it's totally at rest within movement. I know this is a bit of a conundrum, but understand that if you're in if your movement is continuity, if you're on a train, it feels like you're not moving, and you look out of the window and everything else is moving. It's that idea. And then, of course, 6 represents a reflection of harmony of form. This makes me want to, like, okay, let's go. Let's just do a little bit of a dive here. So it makes me want to stop and go into, there we go, you're the one. Makes me want to look at justice. Now, justice obviously is a really important tarot card when we look at the major arcana is the ascent of the serpent. It's the path towards unity and the revelation of the inner child of the fool. And the fool's journey is the hero's journey. Now, justice is the pivot. In the astrological wheel, it sits the furthest, and it acts as the proverbial fulcrum for the wheel to turn around, as it were. And interesting that I mentioned the wheel, right? So if we look at this, we've got Aleph. Aleph is the fool. Everything represents Aleph. Aleph is broken into 20 parts. Now we're going into the Mayan story, 20 parts. So the Aleph is broken into 20 parts. And those 20 parts revolve around the 21st part, which is justice. And so justice represents the sword and the scales. And justice is an emanation of Libra, is an emanation of Venus, is an emanation of number 6, when we want to get right down to it. It's the active part of 6. Taurus is the passive part of 6. So there's this polarity between the Hierophant and justice. And when you look at their tools and how they are represented, you'll see there's this yang yin potential. But now we look at this. This is the 11th trump. But we go, so Aleph, the first of the Phoenician letters that became Paleo-Hebrew that we now have as Hebrew, but they've managed to keep the integrity of the concepts. They haven't changed the letters. They've still got the shapes might have changed a bit, the way it's pronounced might have changed a bit, but the same continuity is here between the Paleo-Hebrew and the Phoenician, which is the 22 basic forms. So the Aleph is the ox, right? That's the first one. That represents all of the other 21. Then we've got Bet, Gimal, Dalet, He, Vav, Zain, Chet, Tet, Yod, Kaf, right? Kaf, the wheel, very important. We end with the wheel, Jupiter. And that's 10. Then we've got Lamed, right? which is number 30. And that sits then as like a pivot on the scales, almost like on the one side you've got the 10. Then you go Lamet, Mem Nun Samek Ayin Pe Tzadi Kof Resh Shin Tav. So there you've got the other 10, right? Tav being the world, right? Resh being the sun, Tzadi being the star, right? Or we missed out Kof. Kof is before Resh, the moon. And before the star, Tzadi, we've got Pe, the tower. Before the tower, we've got the devil, and so forth and so forth and so forth. So we see we've got these 10 cards that stand after Libra, the justice, and we've got the 10 cards that stand before it. And so these two 10s are balancing on the pivot here as an expression of the 10 potencies and the powers of the Sephirot that are unseen. The first 10, right? Bet Jimal Dalet He Vav Zain Chet Tot Tet Kaf. So those are the unseen potentials that are working hidden. And then we've got the outward expressions of these, which is obviously the ones that follow. And so that becomes the beginning of the expression, water. So the manifestation starts in water, mime. And from there's this potential of transformation and change, Nun, the fish within the water, life, right? Then Samek, there's a support. There's something coming out of the water. There's a land mass, right? And then we've got Ayin, the eye. Perception starts to become distinct from awareness, right? And so we're looking at evolution here, right? And then from Ayin, we've got Pe. Then there's a communication. Information starts getting shared one way or another. Nutrition, form. And from this idea of the Ayin, which represents the eye, and the mouth, which represents the ability to inform. We're now looking at Mars's expression, which is number 9 on the Enneagram, and that selfless humanitarian element, which is basically bringing from the out. So we got Scorpio, that deep sensitive root, and Aries, that deep expressive movement and force in the universe. And from there we go to Tzadi, which is Aquarius, which is once again Saturn's receptive potential, which is the water, managing these two different flows of water, the information that moves in two different directions. And after the star, Tzadi Kuf, we've got that lunar potential, the back of the head, which is that recessive, developing the intuitive functions, that the functions of being able to respond, mammalian senses, serpentine senses. We have them all. It starts, I suppose, with the serpent. And from there, Resh developed, and that's the frontal lobes, and that's the rational intellect. And then, the Resh became an expression of the principle of fire, and that fire balances the Aleph, right? It works with the Aleph. That fire is the impetus, that expansiveness that forces us towards moving towards passion and desire that moves towards matter. And that is where we find ourselves locked within Saturn's space, Saturn's cube that we see reflected here. Saturn's cube, where 5 sits in the center. And let's not forget that 5 sits in the center. So we get back to this idea that we're looking at Libra here. Now, Libra is an expression of number 6, right? Being an expression of number 6 on one hand, but on another hand, Libra is also an expression of number 4. There's a Taurus holds the qualities of 4's vibration within Taurus. Even though it's a Libra, on the feminine, taking it in, it becomes very stable and very formative and structured. So that earth element is so strong within this potential of toric, which is the toric field that manifests Saturn. Now we see number 11 here, the 11th card, is actually related to something, the 12th. And this gets really interesting. So when we look at that, we see that this is related to the 12th, but the 11th springs from the 10th. So there's this dynamic relationship here between the wheel of fortune, right, which is where this justice is stringing from, because justice is what governs the wheel of fortune. The wheel of fortune is perfect mathematics, but the wheel of fortune is also the reason that justice exists. And that takes us to sort of consider what this is the center of the story, which is number 5. Now, number 5 is the expression of Mercury. And Mercury, here we can see, is sort of, look at what Mercury is wearing, right? The Ouroboros is around the waist, and there's a purity within. So, but the activity and the action of red is on the outside. And all the tools are here on the table. All the tools that will produce the movement. And the significance of the upward pointing and the downward pointing forces are what symbolizes the chakra, the spinning and the rotational axis of atoms and movement of planets and